Okay, so sometimes when you install these bearings, if the when the Skerton grinder was manufactured, if the lower bearing is not centered on the shaft or the upper bearing isn't centered, there will be some wobble when you install this bearing because it stabilizes the center shaft. So if there's any sort of imbalance in the way the lower bearing or the lower grinder burr is mounted on that shaft, it'll become apparent when you stabilize with the bearing. So I'm going to show you how to fix that wobble. So in this case, you can see that this one's pretty well balanced. When I rotate it, there's a pretty even gap there. It doesn't wobble around at all. So I'm going to add some wobble to this one and then show you how to correct it and get it back to this state right here. Okay, so I've changed this one a little bit so that this has the same sort of wobble and misalignment that some of these grinders have from the factory. So when you install the upgrade kit, you may notice that yours turns out a lot like this one is now, where you'll see there's a really big gap on this side. There's hardly any gap on that side, and actually when you turn it, you can hear the two burrs scraping together. So obviously there's no way you could really grind good coffee with this in the condition that it is now. So there's two main reasons why this is misaligned. One is that this upper burr isn't centered in this bracket. So you can see on this side the ceramic burr is right against the metal, and on this side there's quite a big gap between the bracket and that burr. So one of the things we want to do is try and get this ceramic burr centered in that bracket. And the other thing we want to do is make sure that this lower burr is centered on the shaft. And this one, if you look at the nut in there, you can see that the burr is really close to the edge of the nut on one side and there's a bigger gap on the other side. So we'll do these two things one at a time. First, we're going to try and stabilize or try and center this upper burr. Alright, so I'm just going to loosen up all four of these screws down here just a little bit, maybe like one turn. Just enough so I can slide this ceramic burr around a little bit and just sort of eyeball it and get it as centered in that bracket as I can, just so there's sort of an even gap all the way around. And the other thing I'm going to do is loosen the nut on this top nut there. So grab some needle nose pliers or whatever you have and just sort of give that a little bit of a turn, just enough to loosen it up so it can kind of wobble back and forth. And then with everything loose like that, if you push that burr down into that the other burr, you can see that it's sort of, they will both kind of center themselves. So when it's pushed down tight in there like that, I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and just sort of tighten that nut up again, trying to hold it down with both hands as best as I can, and just give that a little twist and tighten it up. It doesn't have to be real tight. We can tighten it up a little more later, just enough to keep it from moving. So you can see that there's still a little bit of wobble there back and forth, so I'm going to want to work on that a little more. So let's pull it down tight in there and then tighten up these screws again, because at least we know that that bracket and this upper burr should be a lot more centered. So that's, don't make them real tight, because this is sort of a process. We have to loosen these up and mess with it a little more to get them centered. Just snug them up a little bit, just to keep it from moving around. Alright, so now if we turn that, see there's still a lot of wobble there. And I think most of that is because of this nut here not being centered. I'm going to try that again, try to hold that down and tighten this up a little more. It's a little wobbly, but that's already a lot better than it was. And if you look at it from this angle, you can see how there's like a smooth edge, and then you can start to see the burr where it's the cutting edge down there of the burr. And when you spin it around, you can see how there you can see more of the cutting edge than you can on this side. And that's an indication that it's wobbling. So we want to try and get it so that you can see the same amount of cutting edge on the burr all the way around. So I want to, it looks like, kind of push down on this side back here a little bit. So this might take a while just to get it exact. And you can see when it's loose, really how much wobble we have there. That's kind of what we're working with. Trying to get that centered in there. That looks better. Still looks like a little bit high on this side. So I'm just going to put my thumb there and loosen it up just a little bit. Push down and tighten it. It's a little high. But this is the trick, and when you saw it at the beginning of the video, how it was pretty well centered. This is how you get there. It just can take a while. Alright, so I messed around with this for a little bit and I got this back like it was originally in a pretty good spot. Everything seems to be pretty centered. So you can see we have a pretty even gap all the way around. That those burrs aren't wobbling at all anymore. Everything looks pretty centered. So looking at the gap all the way around, it's about the same size. I feel like I'm going to get a pretty good consistent grind out of this now. So hopefully this helps you out if you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to install this bearing and you are having some wobble with the burrs, and hopefully this will help you out. Thanks.